All right, thanks everybody for joining us on June 1st, 2020 at 4 p.m. Just want to first acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. And we just have an announcement in regards to the coronavirus COVID-19 emergency. The City of Courtenay, with the authority of Ministerial Order M139, Local Government Meetings and Bylaw Process COVID-19, Order number 2, has been implemented and changes to its council meetings. In the interest of public health and safety, in-person attendance by members of the public at council meetings will be prohibited until further notice. Council meetings will be presided over the mayor or acting mayor with electronic participation by council and staff. Meetings are available for viewing via live web streaming or video recording on the City of Courtenay's website, and will start at 4 p.m. during this period. And it might just be worth noting that, we are kind of starting through the Restart Up program, Restarting BC. And one of the things that happened today locally is that it's been announced that playgrounds are now going to be open through the school district and the local municipality. So that's sort of a big change. They've been closed for the last 2.5 months, I believe. But I think it is a sign that we are starting to move forward, albeit cautiously. All right, to start off with, we had the adoption of minutes.
And sorry, did you do the Comox First Nation acknowledgement? I just missed it, maybe.
I did it first. I do that first before I go into the COVID stuff. That way, it's the way it's on the agenda, so I try not to vary too far.
I'll move the adoption of the minutes.
I'll second that.
Awesome. Any questions or comments regarding the minutes? Seeing none, unless somebody opposes it, I'll accept the minutes receipt. Next, we have staff reports and presentations, the temporary COVID omnibus policy.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that based on the June 1st, 2020 staff report, temporary COVID-19 omnibus policy amendment, all inspection and maintenance policies, council approve option 1, that due to the unprecedented burden that COVID-19 has placed on staff and resources, effective immediately, all inspection and maintenance policies that involve a proactive approach are converted to a reactive approach, that inspections of assets such as sidewalks, roads, sanitary sewers, drainage systems, and other capital assets and the services they provide for which a proactive inspection and maintenance policy exists until further notice will be initiated solely in response to complaints or in response to reports from staff who become aware of an issue in the course of their other duties, that timelines for response to a complaint mandated by any policy are no longer in effect, and that except for essential services and health and safety issues, any inspection or maintenance activities that cannot be performed while practicing safe physical distancing will be suspended until arrangements can be made to accommodate the orders and guidelines issued by the province and the provincial health officer.
Second.
And Mr. Allen.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this is something obviously that, again, is an effort on the part of MIABC. I would direct your attention, I guess, to the second page of the report, which really provides the background for the policy defense approach. And so really it's an important tool that mitigates liability exposure. We know that we can't maintain the level of staffing and resources necessary to adhere to our existing policies. So this is a sort of an omnibus approach at addressing that and shifting from a proactive to a reactive approach. I don't think there's much more that I have to say about it. It's fairly self-explanatory, other than most of the background there is from the MIABC legal counsel. And so I think that council can feel some comfort that it's sound advice, well thought out and considered and being recommended to all local governments in BC. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to Mr. Allen for the report. Just one question. I wanted to clarify in case anybody in the public is either listening in or looking at this, the report of this afterwards, just to clarify whether this leaves us in any sort of awkwardness in terms of essential services that might malfunction. The intent is that whenever those become known to the city, those would be repaired and attended to with the urgency that they demand. But it's just that we won't be doing the proactive work that I think is a feature of our asset management program, where we're actively looking for things before they break down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. A good example might be trip and fall inspections, where we would actually proactively go out and do a certain number of days or kilometers of sidewalk or what have you. And so that's it shifts from that proactive approach to a reactive complaint-based approach. And it seems to be something that we can expect that we'll be adhering to, assuming that council does pass this motion or recommendation for at least the duration of the stages that we're in through this pandemic.
Thanks very much.
All right, and all right, I don't see any other further questions or comments, so I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
In favor, sorry.
Theos, oh, there he is, yeah.
Yeah, in favor.
Okay, excellent, and I'm in favor as well, so that's unanimous. Thanks very much. Next we have short-term rental accommodations report.
I can move that, Mayor.
Thank you.
So I'll move that based on the March 16th, 2020 staff report, short-term rental accommodations background report, council determined the preferred regulatory approach for short-term rentals and direct staff to begin the process of developing regulations.
Excellent. If someone could second that.
Second.
I'll second that.
Thanks very much. And I'll pass it over to staff. Mr. Allen.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor. I in turn will pass this over to Ian Buck, who can summarize the report and take questions from council.
Great, thanks very much. Through the CAO, Tamara and Council. This report was originally scheduled to be before you in March. That was the day that the really pandemic hit and council was canceled. We prepared it in response to the strategic priorities update that was done last November. And one of the top priorities identified was looking into short-term rentals. The report outlines a number of different strategies that exist really across the globe, from a range of very restrictive full-on bans to more laissez-faire, let the market dictate what happens. Three prominent features that tend to come up in the research on short-term rentals are the impacts on affordability of the long-term rental market. And the idea there, I think, is fairly obvious that units that may otherwise be in the long-term rental market are being used up by short-term rentals. Neighborhood impacts are often identified, and really what that has to do with is the constant changeover in people staying there, so that aren't members of that neighborhood. I will say that in checking with our bylaw department, we haven't had any complaints related to that within the city to this point. And finally, there's unfair competition is quite often cited, where the short-term rentals are operating really at a residential taxation rate in residential neighborhoods, but competing directly with the traditional hotel market. The report includes, and I won't go into the details of all of them, but a number of different examples that exist, some of them throughout the world, and then focusing more in on the local context where the regulation is a little bit lacking. And really what we're looking for at this point is, following a review of this report, if council has any preferred direction in terms of regulation, to provide that to staff, and then we can go off and prepare an additional report and do the consultation that's required. Finally, on that end, consultation obviously is going to be difficult during this time. So depending on the framework that we get into, we may be looking at a more long-term effort to get something back before you again. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report. So I'm seeing three issues, which you just outlined, affordability being maybe the biggest one, the tax collection piece, and then I guess zoning as being sort of the ones that strike me as perhaps needing attention. But my question would be is, I mean, and the report says you're not sure, I suppose, but is there any indication that affordability is being affected by short-term rentals? And the reason I ask the question is because I think in a lot of cases it isn't guaranteed that if a place is refused to be a short-term rental, that it would immediately turn into a long-term rental. And I imagine there are some situations like Airbnbs that the place wouldn't be fit for long-term rental anyway. So I'm just wondering what sort of information we have on that at this point.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and we really don't have any data locally at this point. There's some larger studies that I don't know that they would directly relate to local context here, but most of them are out of major metropolitan areas. And then again, I think it depends. It'll be interesting to see going forward what this whole COVID pandemic does to the industry in general. We've seen news recently of major layoffs in some of the bigger businesses, Airbnb. So how that transitions may affect you know, the local market of number of units that are out there. But I would agree with your statement that there's no guarantee that if something isn't an Airbnb or short-term rental, that it automatically is going to become a rental unit. The idea really is to prevent that from happening and to secure those longer-term rental accommodations.
Yeah, I mean, I can anecdotally say that I found a great deal down in our southern wine country on the island here, and it was very affordable, but turned out to be a tree house. And I don't know if that would be automatically going to long-term rentals. And then you also mentioned that you found about 100 units in your search, and I'm guessing that that would actually be a pretty accurate search. I mean, if you looked on Airbnb, you wouldn't necessarily be missing too many, I would guess. Or do you think there are other venues for short-term rentals to be rented other than that particular platform?
Yeah, there's two that are referenced, Airbnb being the larger one, and VRBO is the other one that was referenced, and there's overlap between the two, we noticed. So you know, it's really a best guess taking a look at their mapping and trying to compare things, but we'd be somewhere in that 100 unit range.
Thanks very much.
Yep. Yeah, sorry, that would go back to about January, February when that data was collected.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Councillor Hilling.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to Mr. Buck and staff for the report. I've attended workshops at Union and BC municipalities where there have been presentations by officials from City of Vancouver, Victoria, and Tofino, which are three of the municipalities that are noted in the report with examples of their policies, and also heard from a representative of Airbnb at that particular workshop. So I think that the main concern I have relates to our shortage of rental accommodation. And while I know that we're seeing the changes with more rental accommodation being built, I think that we still need to be mindful of the possibility that accommodation will be taken out of the rental market for the sake of Airbnbs and other vacation rentals. So my primary interest in us regulating this, I think business licenses make good sense, but I also think that we should be primarily looking at owner-occupied residences, so that we don't get into the situation where a large interest develops a whole building full of short-term rental suites. That, in my view, is unfair competition with our hotel industry, which is certainly going to be hurting in the wake of the pandemic. So while I don't think we want to impact people who are renting a room in their house or a suite that they have in their house to help them pay their mortgage or earn income, I think our preference is to make sure that we don't see large scale suites that are basically set up as a commercial interest that offers these rentals. So I would basically be in favor of the policies that are noted by the City of Victoria and the District of Tofino. And I'm not sure, the only part I'm not sure about is whether we're worried about somebody renting their entire house if they're away on vacation. It seems to me a lot of people do that informally. If they're going away for the winter, they may get a house sitter or something like that, and that's obviously a different matter. But if people are doing these rentals on a regular basis, then I think regulations will assure some sort of standard and will help us to preserve the rental market that we need in our community. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much. Councillor McCullum.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and thank you very much to staff for getting this report in front of us. I know the timing of it seems to make a little less sense than the last time we discussed this, but I think it's important that we address it whether we're having tourism right now or not. I do have a question around how we envision the business licensing to fit together with non-conforming suites. I know, like, anecdotally that there's plenty of illegal suites in the city, and I imagine that some of those probably are being used for short-term rentals, and how we imagine those two things fitting together. If someone has an illegal suite that they're using for short-term rental and not a tenant, if we expect them to bring it up to code, if it needs to be zoned to meet a secondary suite requirement, or if that is kind of left alone, and whether or not we would expect them to start paying for higher utilities for water and sewer if we're licensing it for short-term rental but it's not acknowledged as a legal suite. At what point do we kind of treat it more like a rental? I don't know if that all made sense, but.
Yeah, thanks. It does make sense. And I don't know that I have answers right now. I think it's something in the additional research we do going forward. At the moment, for people who have, just one unit, like a secondary suite in their house, we don't require them to get business licenses. A lot of it is on the honor system. And then through bylaw complaints, I think, is where we start identifying the people that may not be complying. Utilities is another one that comes up. It comes up also in relation to secondary suites. What's the appropriate amount to be charging? And I think that's where more research would be required into the utilization of, somebody's renting every night or weekly, has consistent people in a suite. Is that a higher demand than, say, the secondary suite would have? But so no immediate answers on those costs, but certainly something that would be part of any regulation we bring forward.
Again, thank you for that. That makes sense. I guess what I'm kind of curious about is if we're going to hold them to the same standard that we would for someone that was trying to make their suite legal. But I guess it's hard to give a complete answer when there's so many variations on what a short-term rental actually could be. So, but I am kind of curious of how we're going to address that in a policy. And then the other question I have is around the licensing and implementation of the regulations, whether or not we would imagine that to be a source of revenue or a cost to the city for addressing this.
Yeah, I think we want to definitely compare the suites to the Airbnb or short-term rentals, and try and align the short-term rentals with the hotel industry in terms of the costs that they're paying. So I would, if we did get into, this is just off the cuff without a lot of research behind it, but if we were to get into a business licensing type regulation that perhaps included secondary suites, I would see a sort of nominal fee for the secondary suite rental pool type housing compared to the Airbnb short-term rental, where we'd want to have a higher rate to offset maybe the commercial taxes that they're not paying compared to the hotel industry.
Right.
But a lot of research would be needed behind that.
Okay, great. yeah, in general, I'm definitely in support of us going ahead and considering this. I do tend to agree with Councillor Hillian that owner occupied is probably the best starting point. I would hate to see, houses that are, permanent renters upstairs being impacted with short-term rental downstairs or something like that, both to the neighbors, but also renters who have kind of less say over their surroundings. So I think that's definitely an approach I'd like to see. Thanks.
And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you for staff for this report. It's something that we definitely need to think about, and although we are obviously in a time of lower tourism demand, it gives us the opportunity to stop and reflect on this, and it gives me just some thought regarding timing. I noticed that the Cumberland was waiting until the housing need assessment was completed before giving consideration to this issue. Given that we're unlikely to have a large take up of secondary short-term rentals this summer, what does staff think? Is there a benefit to waiting until the housing needs assessment is completed before moving forward, given that we're not facing a lot of uptake probably of short-term rental at this point?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think there's benefit. First off, I don't know how much detail the housing needs assessment is going to get into on this issue. We expect we're the last group to be presented to council. I expect that in the next couple of meetings here from Alana at the regional district. But I think there's also probably a good idea to try and align things regionally. So looking at what Comox may be doing and what Cumberland may be doing. We've had a lot of back and forth lately on issues between myself and the planner at Comox, and aligning things like our step code and our licensing regulation, and then possibly with a resolution later in the agenda here. So I think a regional approach would benefit well from waiting a bit.
Okay, well, thank you. I also think of like harmonizing the structure regionally makes an awful lot of sense to me. And I just wanted to echo what Councillors McCollum and Hilliam were saying. I do see owner occupied as an important part of this, and perhaps with an exemption for short periods of time, less than a month, where the entire family might be gone. They might rent their entire premises for a short period of time. But I think that plus licensing are probably fairly central to what we're trying to do here. Thanks very much.
And Councillor Moran.
Great, thank you, Mayor. The benefits of going last, I think all of my points have been raised. I agree with, the owner occupied aspect, having some record of who has these short-term rentals. And then the last point that was made by Mr. Buck, and I was going to ask about whether there had been conversations with the other local governments around consistency in the approach, because I believe that there was one, I don't know if it was through the Coalition for Homelessness or what, that estimated there were, I think, 500 or 600 within the valley short-term rental accommodations. So I see that regional consistency throughout the region would be important. And in terms of the MRDT, I know that folks with short-term rentals need to register, and then of course that money is collected. But are you aware of how that's actually, how people, can that actually be, what's the word I'm looking for? Avoided, I guess. Is that a reasonable way to make sure that tax is collected, or are there people slipping through the cracks in that way?
Thanks for the question. I think probably there are people slipping through the cracks. Anywhere there's legislation, people are finding ways around it. I think in a future report, we'd work closely with with Mr. Watson at CVEDS. They're the ones that sort of collect that data and have that background. My understanding of it, and it's at this point very basic, is that the major providers like Airbnb, they require that of their host people. So I think for the bigger players, it's probably not an issue. It may be when you get into some of the smaller organizations, but we can certainly report back with more detail on that.
Yeah, and just as a quick follow-up, I think it would be important to, you know, whatever regulations we come up with that makes it easier to collect those funds would be good as well, and kind of keep track of that. Thank you.
Excellent, and I don't see any other hands up at this point in time. I do know, again, Victoria and Tofino were mentioned, and I think, you know, one of the things that I found really helpful over the past few years, usually at one of the conferences, is talking with Mayor Helps and Mayor Osborne, finding about, you know, what's worked, what hasn't worked. In fact, I think Councillor Cole Hamilton and I met with Mayor Osborne shortly after the election, and looking to them, you know, because they've been doing this for a long time, they have some best practices, but they also know some of the pain and the unintended consequences as well. And so, yeah, I think we're probably all on the same page in terms of what we're hoping to get out of this, and I'm looking forward to see how this plays out. So thanks again, and we'll poll council on this, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch.
In favor?
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. And Councillor Frisch, did you have a follow-up?
I guess I was just going to ask if that was the feedback that staff were hoping for, if they wanted something more obvious.
I certainly won't speak for Ian, but I think we were just looking to get a sense of what your preferences were. You seem to indicate some consistency for owner occupied. I'm sure Wendy's taken copious notes, as she usually does. But I'll turn it over to Ian. Is there any other additional clarity that you could benefit from, Ian?
No, I think that's great between my notes and Wendy's notes. And of course, we can always go back to the video and double check, but I think we've got good direction. The owner occupied, looking at utilities, looking at taxation and business licensing, and more or less following the Victoria Tofino models.
Thanks.
Excellent. And I think one of the things I found shocking when talking with Mayor Osborne is I believe they had up to 5 bylaw officers just dedicated to short-term rentals. So compared that with where we are in Courtenay, that's a big hill to climb if we get to the point where Tofino's at. But it does sound like there's great software out there that helps scrub all the data and come up with reports. So it's I think pretty good. Mr. Allen, did you want to make any further comments?
No, that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. All right, next we have the permanent change to liquor license application.
Move that based on the June 1st, 2020 staff report, permanent change to liquor license application, Crown Isle Golf Club, 399 Clubhouse Drive. Council approve option 1 and direct staff to publish notice on the city's website requesting public input on Crown Isle Golf Club's proposed permanent change to a liquor primary license application.
Second.
All right, that's been seconded, and I'll pass it over to staff.
Thanks again, Mayor. And I'll turn this over to Matt Fitzgerald, who can summarize the report and take questions from council.
Thank you. Through CAO to Mayor and Council. So this proposal is to permanently change the hours of operation for an established liquor license located at 399 Clubhouse Drive. The proposed change is for the pub to open at 9 a.m. Instead of the current 11 a.m. And so in terms of next steps, staff are recommending that we post notice of the proposal on the city's website for 2 weeks, requesting comments from the public. after which we'll bring back a second staff report summarizing those results and ask for council to make a recommendation at that point. Thank you.
Excellent. And are there any questions or comments from council? Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the report from staff. But I just, it looks pretty straightforward in that it's not a huge change. They are noting that the restaurant already has this sort of permitting in place, if I'm correct. But of course, I just wanted to say to the public that are intently watching this meeting that drinking too much isn't good for you, and so I'm sure they'll take that into consideration. But that's all.
All right. All right. With that, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor?
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Support.
And I'm in favor as well. All right. Moving on to development permits.
I'll move that based on today's staff report, development permit with variances number 1906, 925 Braidwood Road. Council approve option 1 and proceed with issuing development permit with variances number 1906.
Seconded.
Thanks very much. And I'll pass over to Mr. Allen again.
Thanks again, Mayor, and over again to Matt Fitzgerald to summarize and take questions.
Thank you. Through CAO to Mayor and Council, this application is for a development permit with variances for a 5-story seniors care facility. The seniors care facility is comprised of 100 residential care rooms and 61 care facility beds. This proposal is in substantial conformity with what Council would have seen when the parcel was rezoned in 2019 and concluded early this year. 3 variances are proposed as part of this development permit. The first is concerning building height, which is increasing from a maximum of 14 meters to the proposed 19.4 meters. The second is fence height, which is increasing to 3.5 meters from the maximum of 2 meters. And the third is the minimum landscape screening height for a small area of the site, which is proposed to be no height when 3 meters is otherwise required. Staff are recommending the council approves this development permit along with the variances I've just summarized. Thank you.
All right. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I note that there was extensive discussion of this proposal when it originally came before council, and in fact, that it went back for a number of modifications, primarily to permit a walking path that connects Braidwood Road with Ryan Road. And I know that there were also concerns from neighbors about fencing and such. My only concern is that we seem to have some public feedback from a number of people in the neighborhood, particularly indicating that they received notices of these variances pretty late in the day and expressing some concern about their ability to actually register any concerns that they have given that late notice. Granted, it's not a lot of residents, but it does make one wonder if there are more people who haven't got in touch because they also received late notice. I know staff mailed the notices out, but it seems that they didn't actually arrive until perhaps just on Friday. So I'm just wondering if staff have any comment on that issue, and whether we would be in any difficulty if we delayed this motion by a couple of weeks, just to assure that the public in the neighborhood have been fully versed in what's going on.
Yeah, thank you through CAO to Mayor and Council. So the legislative requirements are 10 days for a notice to be sent out. In this case, Canada Post, I understand, has some backlogs. They did arrive later than they normally would. But I guess notwithstanding that, people still receive notice that council would be discussing this today and making a decision on it, and those folks can provide comments.
And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I had a question more about the fence variations on the pathway, and I know there are some fairly good diagrams showing the retaining walls and then the fences, what the fence height would be on top of them. And I guess I'm wondering if there are any comment from staff on the design of it and how that would affect sort of the community aspect of it. I would note that good design for making a cohesive community is to give privacy where it's necessary, but also have some visibility. And the last thing I would want is this pathway to turn into a dark tunnel, fenced in between two properties. So I'm not quite sure that I understand exactly where this is going to be very high fencing and where it's going to be low fencing. I wonder if you could explain that a little better to me.
Yeah, through CEO to Mayor and Council. So the figure 2 does a fairly good job of showing the fence as it travels along the profile of the property. And you have to remember this is a very long property, and it's going to be regraded as part of the proposal. So what we end up with is a retaining wall with the fence on top of it. So that really is the primary, or is the reason for the variance, because there would be a fence located on top of a retaining wall, and how the city measures fence height is the average grade on both sides of the fence. So in that case, it comes up the over height. That diagram also it shows the fence material. So in part of it's a lattice top fence, and then it moves to a solid fence on the wall, and then a solid fence. I believe part of it there would be requirements for the fencing. Because there's a memory care component of the development, so there's security considerations that would have to go into that. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I guess what I'm wondering is there any section along the pathway where you can actually see over top of the fence on either side?
Yeah, through CAO to Mayor and Council. So yeah, on different areas, because you'd be, if you're on the pathway, you're up above the retaining wall, so you'd be able to look through the lattice or over the fence. It's really on the development side of the property where you have a retaining wall and then a fence, so you wouldn't be able to see over that.
Okay, and so the retaining wall plus the fence, and it's a solid fence, I notice, around the memory care area. What's the total height on that? Is that indicated in the report, or is it just up to my guessing here?
Yeah, the specific height of that location, I don't know that, but I can say that the variance would be to the maximum limit of anywhere the fence occurs.
Okay, and staff are satisfied that this is a reasonable design?
Is that a yes?
Sorry, I'll rephrase that. Is our staff satisfied that this is a reasonable design?
Oh, sorry, my mic must have cut out there. Yes, we're satisfied that it meets the development permit guidelines.
Thanks.
All right. And Councillor Theos. He looks like he might be frozen. Councillor Theos, can you hear us? We may have lost Councillor Theos. I don't know if IT want to see if you can maybe prompt him to rejoin, but we'll move along to Councillor McCollum.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I also just have some questions about what the look and feel of this fence would be. I imagine that it will look something like the concrete fencing that we see in other areas of the city where there's traffic, although some of it sounds like maybe it'll be wood. Because the fence height is measured differently than how high it is on that public path, and I think our main concern is how it feels to the public. Could you give me a sense of how high it would be compared to other fencing that we see in and around town, like say, for example, the concrete fencing that went in with the Lerwick expansion? Would it be similar to that, or would it be higher than that?
Sure. So through CAO to Mayor and Council, I think if if we want to get a good visualization for how the fencing would look, attached to the report would be page 58 of the council package. It shows the different fences that are proposed. So it even shows one on top of the wall as part of that details.
Okay. So just to clarify, because the public pathway is essentially on top of the retaining wall, for the public, it's going to feel like a regular fence. And on the other side of the fence is where it's going to feel like the 3-meter height for its residents. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's, I think, the only thing. Oh, I did have another question. So they've changed the type of fencing on one side to accommodate the neighbor. Is that person satisfied with the design that's being put forward?
Through CAO to Mayor and Council, I believe that was comments that came out of the rezoning application, and so those neighbors were particularly concerned about having fencing along that property owner, and that change was made and has been carried through to the development permit stage.
Great, thanks.
All right, and we have Councillor Theos back, so I'm going to let him go here. Councillor Theos.
Thank you so much. So much has changed since and happened since the last time we dealt with this project, and I'm interested in knowing with the changes, especially to talk about changes in senior care facilities in regards to density of the buildings and how many potential residents can be on the same floor and in the same room, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very interested in knowing, have any potential regulations impacted this particular project, and are we knowledgeable of those regulations if they are to be changing?
Yeah, through CAO to Mayor and Council. So no, we're not aware of any changes to regulations. From a city perspective, we regulate the land use, which is seniors home, and then on the provincial side, they Island Health would regulate the operation of the facility, and looking at the size of the units or separation, which may come as a result of current situations.
All right, and Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to Councillor Theos's point, I attended a regional meeting of the hospital boards on the island on Friday, and received information there that there will be a review of seniors facilities and the regulations that apply to them in the wake of the pandemic and the issues that we're aware of. So I think that's something that will be taken care of by the provincial government. I did have two further questions for staff. The feedback from the community that we've received, apart from asking for a delay in consideration of this, two issues that came up. One was a significant increase in traffic in this region and the condition of the road itself. So I'm just wondering where we stand with the traffic studies that I believe we're expecting that in that area, and if we have any plans to upgrade the road, given the complaints about it and the fact that we're going to have another period of significant truck and heavy equipment moving through there during construction, and obviously more people when this development comes to fruition. And then the second issue that was raised was removal of trees, and I wonder if staff could speak to the landscaping plan for this and how it'll impact trees on the site. Thank you.
I see, Mr. Allen, you had your hand up.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. So I think there's two parts, or there's two people that on staff that could speak to this. So obviously, Ian can speak to the planning and development related stuff along with Matt. But Trevor can speak to the infrastructure improvements, the road improvements that are believed planned in the coming capital improvement program that we'll be undertaking in due course. So Ian, I don't know if you want to, or Matt, weigh in, and then maybe Trevor could speak to the other question about the road itself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I can answer a couple aspects of it. The traffic study that was done really looked at options of opening the end of Braidwood back up versus potential reopening of Back Road at the hill where Dingwall's coming down. The recommendations in particular, because of concerns in this neighborhood, were not to, there are two reasons, but not open Braidwood, because that would direct more traffic to this area, as well as some technical challenges with the distance from the existing intersection. Whether there's any possibility of opening up Back Road needs a lot more analysis and work with the ministry. It does help to alleviate some traffic on Ryan Road, but doesn't do, it's not going to be a miracle fix for added density in this neighborhood. Regarding the trees, there is a plan in the landscape plan, and Matt may have it more handy, but the trees up at the top near Braidwood Road are identified with red sort of circles, bubbles around them. And those are ones that are going to be retained. And that's the majority of the trees up at the Braidwood side, including, I believe, a large Gary oak tree. And then, yeah, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kushner or Mr. Davidson on the design for Braidwood Road.
Thank you through the CEO to Mayor and Council. The Braidwood Road design, Council will recall, that was a carryover project from last year. That's nearing completion and should be completed by the fall. Keep in mind that the aggregate cost for the Braidwood Road between the water, sewer, storm, and road section is about $4 million. So it's a significant project, and it will be deliberated by Council in the 2021 financial plan, more likely around October.
Thanks very much.
All right, and did other staff want to comment as well, or are we good? All right, Councillor Frisch.
I just had another question about access to the pathway, and would it be simple if the restaurant wanted access from that pathway for them to do that at some point?
Matt, is that something you can answer?
Sure, I'll take a stab through CAO to Mayor and Council. So it's the pathway is opened as right away. So I don't see why they couldn't take access off of it in the future. I don't know, Ian, if you have any further comments on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It will become a public right of way, public road. So design considerations of how that connection happens would need to take place, but certainly it would be possible.
And the connection to Ryan Road, obviously there's a ditch there right now. Is there any thoughts to have some sort of temporary bridge?
So the frontage, if this, as this proceeds through to building permit stage, the entire frontage of Ryan Road would be upgraded. That would be curb, gutter, sidewalks, piping, obviously the storm that's there. So the ditch would disappear. So continuation of what you see in front of the RCMP station, the sidewalk ends there. It would continue along to the edge of this property, which would then get up to the bus shelter, and then where the walkway would come down on the side of the property.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Kushner, you had something to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I would just add that this will also align with Council's design for that sidewalk on that section of Ryan Road. So that portion will be performed by the developer if it proceeds, and then of course it'll align with the design that we have as part of our operating budget for 2020.
Excellent. And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to move that we defer decision on this until the next council meeting to allow time for further public input. I believe my motion, if it gets a seconder, is undebatable.
Second.
Okay. And does anybody want to speak to it? Mr. Buck.
I think the only thing I'd add, if we were to defer it, we might want to do it for a longer period of time in order to mail out again to the residents. The only alternative that I could see would be to directly contact those that asked for more time and let them know they had another week. Something to consider.
Okay, Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'd support this motion. Given that all of the mail that we send in Courtenay has to go to the Lower Mainland to be sorted and then come back to us, it's not unusual for it to be a week or more for a letter, even if it's going to next door, to actually arrive. And it seemed to be a common theme among, by my count, a majority of the responses spoke of not having enough time, and it seemed to exacerbate any concerns they have. So perhaps this would be a respectful way of addressing that. Perhaps 2 weeks then, if we're going to be sending out another notice.
What does staff think is a reasonable amount of time if we're extending?
Yeah, realistically, I think it needs to be longer than that. The legislated mail out requirement and what we did in this case was, I think, 1 day more than what's technically required is 10 days for it to be in the mail. And in that case, I believe it was the 19th or 20th when it was mailed out. And then we had comments as recent as Friday saying it had just arrived. So I think we'd want to build that buffer in there of, maybe 3 weeks to a month.
That seems reasonable to me. Thanks very much.
Okay, Councillor Healing, actually, Councillor Frisch, you've got your hand up, but Councillor Healing, we may want to think about the timeline there. Councillor Frisch?
3 weeks, Mr. Mayor, would be fine in my view. And to a subsequent council meeting within a month. How about we make it that?
That sounds good. Councillor Frisch?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My only contemplation here would be around what this means for the developer and what issues we might look to find and resolve, given more time to think about it. I do remember talking about this for quite a while, about the impacts on transportation, the impacts on height and affordable housing and so on. So I'm not sure that there's any issue that we've missed. So I'll probably not be in favor. I don't know if staff have any thoughts about how the developer's going to respond to that delay.
All right. And Mr. Ward, do you have your hand up, as well as Mr. Allen?
I do. I'll go after Mr. Allen.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So I seem to recall this developer being concerned about any delays, of course, to the project. Maybe I'll just turn this over to Ian, who can speak to that.
Yeah, in terms of delays, it's one of the things we face on a regular basis. Fast isn't ever fast enough, it seems. In this particular instance, the only thing I will note is there were concerns during the beginning of the zoning process, and when we drafted the covenant following the third reading of the bylaw, it was many months before we had the covenant back, where in a lot of circumstances they're returned within a matter of days. So what that means for their particular delay or timelines, I'm not sure, but yeah, we're always under pressure, fast and faster.
Okay. And Mr. Allen, did you want to add something? Okay. All right. And sorry, I went to click and it went away. I think it was Councillor McCollum. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Yeah, I was unclicking and clicking as the conversation went.
And actually,
yeah.
Mr. Ward also had his hand up earlier and deferred. Did you need to jump in now, Mr. Ward?
Through the CEO to Mayor and Council, just for clarification, Councillor Healing is correct, and the motion is to postpone and either indefinitely or to a certain time. And I'm not sure if that was seconded yet, but so postpone would be the correct motion and correctly not debatable. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, Councillor McCollum.
Well, in that case, I probably should just hold my comments if we're not supposed to be debating the deferral. So I'll follow that.
All right. So are we waiting for a seconder for the increased amount of time?
I seconded it.
Okay.
Oh, well, I mean, I seconded the first motion. I don't know if Councillor Hillian is changing it to a different timeline.
Yeah, I think he gave it 1 week and then based on staff feedback, made it, I think up to a month. Councillor Hillian, and I see Ms. Rochda, you had your hand up as well. So, Councillor Hillian, does that sound correct?
Yeah, and my apologies that the language wasn't correct. I believe Mr. Ward's wording of postponing for 4 weeks is appropriate.
I will second that.
Okay. And all right. And any other further comments, Councillor Hillian? Seeing none, I can call a question. Oh, did you put your hand up again? Okay. I'll call a question on the amendment motion. Actually, I'll poll council. Almost Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
Opposed.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
Opposed.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'll be in favor as well. But I do see your hand up again, Councillor Hillian. Is this going back to the main motion as amended?
Sorry, Mayor, I just haven't taken it down. My apologies.
We're probably both doing it at the same time, and it's going back on. All right. The main motion as amended, are there any questions or comments on that? Mr. Ward.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, through the CEO and Mayor and Council, it's not an amendment motion, it's a subsidiary motion which supersedes the first motion. So this takes precedent. So the only motion that would be action is the postpone.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarity. Sorry about that. To me, it was for a week and then it became up to a month. That's where I was thinking the amendment came in, but I think we're good with the wording, Ms. Richta, as we're all clear on how it's worded. All right, well, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, the postponement motion passed, so we move on to the next item on the agenda.
Absolutely, I was like, hey, we just did that. I was thinking the same thing, perfect. All right, next we have the temporary patio program.
I'm happy to move that if I don't know if it's anyone else would like to, but is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Councillor Theos wasn't here when we were going over this, so he missed that. So
I'll move that based on the June 1st, 2020 staff report entitled Temporary Patio Program and Temporary Expanded Service Area Authorization, that council authorized staff to suspend enforcement of zoning bylaw 2500 parking requirements until November 1st, 2020 for restaurants, fast food restaurants, and neighborhood pubs who need to erect a temporary outdoor seating and dining area on existing parking areas, provided that the combined indoor and outdoor seating does not exceed pre-COVID-19 maximum seating capacities, that the patio occupies a maximum of 50% of the business's required parking stalls. The only structure permitted are fencing, translucent shields, and ramps. The patio must not be located over any landscaped area. The patio must not be located within a yard adjacent to any residential use. And the patio can only be used between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. daily. And furthermore, that the City of Courtenay provides the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch pre-approval for all food primary, liquor primary, and manufacturing licensees within the city who may apply for an expanded service area.
Second.
And I'll hand it over to Mr. Allen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And again, I'll turn this over to Matt Fitzgerald, who can summarize and take questions.
Yeah, thank you. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council. So these initiatives are really in response, obviously, to physical distancing requirements. So we've proposed two new initiatives. The first is the temporary patio program, which, as Councillor Frisch had just read out, will allow restaurants to use up to half of their parking stalls for a temporary patio area. The second initiative is the pre-approval through the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch. In this case, the city or city council would provide a pre-approval to all expanded service area. This would allow applications to the province to be expedited and the approval process to go much quicker. Both programs would conclude the first one in November 1st of this year and the liquor and cannabis program on October 31st of this year. And these are in addition to the previously approved sidewalk patio changes that council approved a couple of meetings ago. So I think this report summarizes those three initiatives and hopefully provides the restaurant and public sector in the community some needed flexibility. I'll take any questions.
All right, and we have Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and I'm very excited to see this come forward and happy that we've been so flexible in making it come forward so quickly. I had a question about maybe a future report coming about other businesses that aren't included in this. For instance, businesses that sell goods other than food and liquor. Is that something that would be coming to council as well if a store wanted to expand out into its parking area or the city's parking area to sell stuff? Are we contemplating that as well?
Mr. Allen?
Excuse me. Thanks, Mayor. I don't know if we are or not. I recall some discussion, but perhaps Ian, I can turn it over to you or Matt.
Yeah, thanks. It's not something, to be honest, that we've contemplated yet. There was some discussion, I believe, related specifically to the downtown and expanding out sort of on the market days where they expand out into the roadway, whether that's something that could be a little more permanent, but nothing formally underway on that.
And could you comment on staff's capacity to tackle an issue like that? I assume we'd need a subsequent motion and report, on what that would entail and if that's possible and advisable.
Yeah, I think on the, if it was something council wanted on the private side, it would be a resolution very similar to what we've crafted here. So not a lot of time. In terms of the downtown area and what that looks like, there's the parklet program that is being worked on, but bigger questions around closure of roads that may take a bit more time.
So would the parklet program include that contemplation of having businesses move into park areas to sell stuff?
I think that's something in that report that we would want to comment on. Typically, parklets are intended for public use, not unlike patios, for example, that are intended for the private use of that particular business.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we could report out on that and the implications in particular around parking if that were to expand to all uses downtown, for example.
Okay, understood. And I know it's a little off topic, but I'll just throw it out there. And if we're willing to use some parking space as parklets, which are essentially small parks for the public to sit and enjoy, maybe we do contemplate something along the lines of the Duncan Commons area. That could be one large park and use the parking spaces for more commercial use during this COVID pandemic. But that's just a thought. Thanks.
All right, and Councillor Theos.
Appreciate it. No, this is one of the tools that the food and services industry can actually use to basically lift themselves up and continue to do business during this challenging times. Certainly, I'm wondering in regards to the patios. Would there be an opportunity for music or entertainment to be on those patios as a draw for the businesses? And what would be involved in adding that to their licenses? And I also wanted to say that these are times where the food and service industry, retail industry, they're going to be really having to change the way things are being done. And similar to what Councillor Frisch was suggesting, more businesses, different of nature, coming out to the streets or sidewalks, like retail. I always felt retail, once again, if you go to Europe, you'll see retail bringing their racks out to the streets on a very common basis, or at least out on the sidewalk there as in terms of a draw. So I appreciate that. And if you can answer the question in regards to the entertainment, I'd much appreciate it, please, ma'am.
Through CAO to Mayor and Council. So I guess two different types of businesses, really. You have just plain restaurants that don't serve alcohol, and I don't see a reason why they couldn't have music or entertainment on the patio area. Municipal noise bylaws would cover any adverse effects if they did get too noisy. But regarding serviced areas, I think the province may have, or the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch may have different licensing requirements if it's an entertainment serviced area. So I don't have the full answer to that, but my suspect that it would impact the liquor license.
Mr. Allen?
Yeah, I wonder if, I mean, this could expand into a much broader set of conversations and frankly, considerations by council or by staff back to council. I wonder if this might be something that could be considered by the Comox Valley Regional Economic Recovery Task Force. You know, I'm not sure if that's appropriate, but it seems to me this is really about economic recovery. And that group is scheduled to meet, from what I understand, this Thursday at 11 a.m. So that might be a good place to start the conversation and to see perhaps regionally what's being done in other local governments, member municipalities.
Thanks, Mr. Allen.
And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I think Mr. Allen makes a good suggestion. I would also think that we wouldn't necessarily act on this until we got a request from the downtown merchants or the chamber. And that's where I would expect the initiative to come from.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and I don't see any other questions or comments, so maybe we'll call the question on what's in front of us right now, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch.
In favor?
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm also in favor.
Excellent, and I'm in favor as well. And so that's good. Next, we have a briefing note on the 6th Street multi-use active transportation bridge.
I'll move receipt.
I'll second that.
Excellent, and we'll pass it over to staff. Mr. Allen.
Thanks again, Mayor. Yeah, I'll turn this over to Chris Davidson, our Director of Engineering Services, Interim Director, and he can go over the briefing note and take questions from council.
Thank you, David. Through the CAO to Mayor and staff, Mayor and Council, pardon me. Purpose of this briefing note is just to provide an update on the 6th Street Bridge multi-use active transportation bridge project. Main points of the update, I'm happy to report we were approved for grant funding that we applied for the options analysis that was brought forward in January. Grant funding will fund approximately 50% of the study, or $29,300. Currently have a request for proposal coming back for review. So we went out for a request for proposal for detailed options analysis to further advance the design of the 4 bridge options. Also do a little bit of stakeholder engagement. So that closed last Friday. So we'll be proceeding through evaluation award of that shortly. As we progress, we'll be looking at options for potential additional funding to help support the bridge. So next steps for the project, Q2 and Q3 of this year, we'll proceed with procuring consulting services and development of our detailed options analysis. Q4 of this year, we're hoping to report back to council on findings of the detailed options analysis. At the same time, we'd look to council to provide direction on preferred option for the 6th Street Bridge and also direction on whether or not to proceed into detailed design. Pending direction and subject to budget approval, we would then proceed into detailed design Q1 of 2021. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, we generated a couple. Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the report. I look forward to seeing this project progressing. I recall that when we first looked at options for the 6th Street Bridge, there were 4 different options, and one of them, which I recall, it was the bowstring option, seemed to have greatest amount of interest from in discussion. I'm just curious as to whether if council were to weigh in on one of the 4 options or sooner rather than later, whether that would have any whether that would be a more efficient process and make the work for staff just anyway perhaps more streamlined. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, any direction that could be provided would be appreciated. It certainly help us to focus our efforts as we proceed through this detailed options analysis.
All right. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was going to say, is that something that we could, I realize tonight might be too soon because people haven't had a chance to look again at the options, although I think I'm fairly clear on the one that I thought was the best value for money and the best option. Is that something we could we come back and narrow down the options, say in the next few weeks or in the near term, so as to simplify the number of different alternatives the staff would have to work through?
And Mr. Allen, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I think, you know, it speaks to our capacity right now, and that's why it's laid out in this sort of a schedule, I guess. But that said, what I would suggest is that we take this to the next senior leadership team, either this week or perhaps next week, if because we're almost well, we've got the agenda going out tomorrow. But I think we should discuss it first so that we understand what our capacity is. We'll be going through our 2020 corporate work plan with council at the end of June on the 27th. So I think there's going to be a number of these capacity and work plan discussions that we'll have. So I would just ask that you sort of bear with us over the next couple of weeks, and worst case scenario, we'd probably be looking at a more fulsome discussion on the 27th of June.
That sounds great. Then my suggestion was simply to assist with staff capacity, not meant to increase the load. So thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. And so I just want to clarify 2 things. The grant funding we received, that was for the study that we had already done and the report we had already received. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And in that report, if I remember correctly, it had the 4 different types of bridges.
That's also correct, yes. Okay.
And so if I'm understanding this right, Councillor Cole-Hamilton suggesting that we go back to that report and sort of decide which ones we seriously want to look at and which ones none of us may even be interested in. Is that the intent of your motion, Councillor?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not against that. I presume that we would do that anyways at some point, but yeah, I could go either way on it as well. If staff have some reasons that one design is better than the other, that would obviously come out in a report, but happy to have that conversation sooner than later.
All right, Mr. Allen, did you want to add?
Yeah, well, actually, when the briefing note was being drafted, I expected that council would have some of these questions. So that's why we added in the next steps in terms of a timeline. I guess I turn this back to Chris Davidson and say that it seems to me that the next steps are to get that detailed options analysis. Is that going to bring the estimates that were provided in the original document into from a Class D to a Class C, or what is the benefit of waiting for that, if at all, prior to further discussion on the options that were originally presented?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it absolutely will refine the costs. They'll also further advance the design of the 4 options, but also the connections too. So we're hoping to come back with further detail, basically more detailed drawings showing plan and elevation views, just to give a better idea of what the 4 options might look like. Part of this detailed options analysis will also be conducting some stakeholder engagement. So unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to do any in our previous options analysis due to lack of time and resources, basically. So now we'd like to go back and engage with key stakeholders and also open it up to the community if that's possible.
All right, Mr. Allen.
So I guess what I want to be clear about is there value in waiting until the detailed options analysis? Because let's say the council weighs in 2 or 3 weeks time or whatever, and says, yeah, this is our preferred option. And then we go ahead and do an options analysis that demonstrates that it's actually not that feasible. I mean, that's a question that I would ask. And so I realize I'm putting you on the spot, but perhaps you could explain that a little better.
Oh, sure thing. So at this point in time, we have no direction from council. So we're investigating the 4 options equally. If council could provide direction as to which options they may prefer, maybe narrow it down to 2 or 3, then we can focus our efforts of this current study on those 2 or 3 options, maybe develop them a little better and maybe not investigate one of the 4. If there's one that's definitely not likely to advance. However, if there is no clear preference for any of the 4 options, then I recommend we proceed based on the direction we have now, which is to investigate all 4 equally.
Okay. Mr. Allen, did you want to follow up, or are you okay?
Well, again, I think what we can do is, we've heard the discussion the council's had here. I think we'll talk at a staff level. But it seems to me that there might be some benefit in having a discussion with council sooner rather than later on this on these options. So just bear with us, I guess, and we'll have that discussion amongst staff, and then we can weigh in sooner rather than later on what options should be included in the options analysis, detailed options.
All right. Sounds good. Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, I think what I was wanting to say has already been addressed by our CAO. I think a fairly straightforward conversation could uncover whether there's any of those 4 options neither staff nor council are interested in pursuing. So I think there's value in having in asking council and actually just our other staff members for their input ahead of seeking out details on all 4 of them. So I look forward to discussing this again.
Awesome. Excellent. And Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. My recollection when we discussed this before was that there were pros and cons, obviously, to each option. And as we discussed them, some of those pros or cons could be changed based on, one example was the surface of the bridge was noted as a negative. But then there was discussion that the surface actually could be changed. I think that was regarding kind of lifespan of the materials or construction. So I guess I would be concerned about throwing out an option before looking at the particular ways that any option could be adapted to meet our needs. So, to look at what we looked at previously, which of course wasn't a detailed analysis, and just say, oh, well, that doesn't fit and take it off the list, I don't think gives us a fulsome decision-making process around that. So, I mean, there may be one out of the 4 that's really obvious for sure, but I think that there were others that on first glance maybe didn't go to the top of the list, but as we started to dissect them a bit, we found that they could go higher on the list of preferences with some adaptations. So yeah, so that's my comment on that. Thanks.
Okay. So, and is this just a briefing note? It is going to come back to us. So, and unless there's any further comments, I think we got a clear path ahead of us that, you know, we'll start meandering down. I'll pull council. Well, it is just a briefing note. So unless you are against it, I'll just assume that we're all in favor. Anybody have any issues with that? Seeing nobody having issues, we'll move on to 8.1, which is resolutions of council.
Great, thanks, Mayor. I'll move 8.1, which is the Urban Agricultural Opportunities Food Security Resolution. Whereas the onset of COVID-19 has significantly impacted food security for local residents, and whereas there's been an upsurge in interest in urban food production and efforts to enhance local food security, and whereas food security policy aligns with Council's strategic priorities of climate change mitigation and sustainability goals, therefore be it resolved that Council support urban agricultural opportunities and improve food security by directing staff to prepare a draft bylaw for Council's consideration that considers past research done by Lush Valley Food Action Society and North Island College and current input from the Planning Department, the Comox Valley Food Policy Council, and residents to allow small-scale commercial urban food production, including but not limited to chickens, in brackets not roosters, bees, and urban farm stands on all residential property within the city of Courtenay. And furthermore, that staff consult with the town of Comox's planning department in the interest of alignment with their proposed urban agricultural policy.
Second.
Thanks for that. And
if I could just speak to that a little bit, Mayor? Yeah, so obviously some of this came out of just COVID-related conversations around food security and the Food Policy Council, and seeing that food security has been highlighted as a pretty big focus lately. And also we had, I wasn't on council, of course, at the time. Some of you were back in 2017. This issue was explored, and the referenced documents were created based on engagement, etc., and it didn't go through. Since that time, I know that I've received numerous emails, you know, when I was during the election in 2018, which was a year after that, many people brought up this issue, and it has only gotten, I think, more prominent with the onset of COVID-19. And there's been a real surge in gardens and people wanting to keep chickens and be more sustainable, and being concerned about the food supply chain, etc. And I know that there are some opposing views to this, and I certainly have some background information that I think addresses many of those concerns, and I'm happy to jump in again at some point during this conversation. But I do believe that this is something that I was muted for some reason. It's something that local folks want, and of course, if we look back to 2017, I believe it was 94 or 95% of respondents were actually in favor of this, although it didn't pass. So I would say that that support is still there, and possibly is even more so. And that's all I'll say for now. Thank you.
My apologies for muting you.
I felt like it was the Oscars, and I was, you know, they were starting to play the music, and
yeah, well,
you know,
there was some audio coming through, so I went to mute. But of course, when audio starts coming through, it jumps around on my screen through the active speaker is, so I zigged when I should have zagged. My apologies.
Thank you.
But we do have a few people with their hands up, starting with Councillor Fritsch.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Morin, for bringing this forward. It's definitely something that I'm interested in supporting. I just wanted some clarity from staff on where we stand with backyard bees and I guess farm gate sales. My understanding was that those two are already deemed to be legal in the city. Is that in fact correct, or am I missing it?
Thanks for the question. Sorry, CAO, just jumped in there. No, at this point, we don't have regulations that would specifically permit that. I can't directly speak to our animal bylaws, but most often these regulations are done through the zoning bylaw. So home-based business regulations are amended to allow for the farm stands at the end of the driveway, and then regulations around the keeping of, in this case, we'd focus more largely on the chickens, and number of chickens, location, and that type of thing are often what comes into it.
And could you comment on staff capacity for this sort of initiative? Is this fairly straightforward, or is this something a little bit larger?
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. It can get large. In about 2010, I did similar amendments to the City of Campbell River's bylaws, and aside from chickens, it was a straightforward process. They tend to be an issue with neighborhoods, and I'm sure there's lots of research on both sides. But the other amendments are relatively straightforward. Again, the issue I think we may run into is if we need to do consultation. Now is not a great time for doing open houses, although we do have some, I've talked with our sustainability staff on some potential ideas for how we may be able to operate limited number, sort of 40 to 50 people open houses. In that case, more particularly to our OCP, but could be across the board. So I think the capacity is there for quick amendments, but like I say, the chickens sometimes can get testy with the neighborhood.
Are you familiar with whether Campbell River has kept that change to their laws?
I believe they have, and there wasn't, in the time that I was there, I left in 2012, there wasn't a lot of uptake except for a local organic blueberry farmer who put a stand on their property. But outside of that, didn't see a lot, but the intent was to allow people with existing backyard gardens to sell, whether it's flowers or extra tomatoes they're growing or cucumbers, that kind of thing. So I think having it as an option is a great idea, but not a lot of uptake there.
Thank you so much.
And Mr. Allen, you had your comment or question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I guess it's unknown from my perspective, but if there were concerns about chickens, let's say, is there a bylaw enforcement, based on complaints that would add to the workload for the bylaw folks? I'm just posing it as a question. So I would say that that would something that, notwithstanding Ian's comments about the amendments to the zoning bylaw, that's one thing. But if it generates complaints, does that have an impact on our capacity to enforce?
Is that directed at Mr. Buck, or was that just a comment and we can continue on with the?
Yeah, no, it's just, I'm posing it as a question. It's more rhetorical right now than looking for an answer. I think that's something that we'd need to put our minds to if council wanted us to pursue this. I just think it's another factor.
Okay, fair enough. And if this does come back, then I assume part of that report would be seeing what the impact has been in other communities. And so that sounds good. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. A little bit of deja vu here because during my first year on council, this initiative came forward. That was 10 years ago, 2010. When Mr. Ward will remember, a survey went out with the tax notices, and 2,400 surveys were returned out of about, I believe, 7,000 sent out. And the results at that time showed a significant percentage were opposed. 61% of opponents of respondents were opposed at that time. I think the community has shifted quite substantially during that time. And we've actually seen during the COVID-19 pandemic that the issue of food security has become very significant, not only in our community, but across the country, as we see the impact on supply chains of this type of an event. And so I think it's timely that Councillor Morin brings this forward. But I did want to just ask in terms of staff workload, and Mr. Ward may remember this, it was my understanding that there was a draft bylaw that was prepared back in 2010, and it was fairly basic. It talked about the number of chickens that would be allowed, and the no roosters was a given. And we never actually got to the point of implementing it. Perhaps it was just a proposal, but I'm just wondering if the work that was done back then on that issue would still be of any use for staff and perhaps save some time on this go around. And I put that question to Mr. Ward.
Mr. Ward?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen, did you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Through the CEO to Mayor and Council, Councillor Hillian is correct. I'm sure there's information that we could regurgitate for this issue, no problem. Frankly, I think the amendments are the easy part, the enforcement's the hard part in the future. But that's my bylaw enforcement hat, and that's was expressed back in the day. The concerns about bylaw enforcement, noise, etc., smells, rats, all that. But like you say, I think the community has changed over the last few years, and I'm not saying I've changed my mind yet, but you never know.
Thank you. The other comment I wanted to make is that at that time, the survey was designed to gauge opinion depending on the part of the city. And there was a significant difference between West Courtenay and East Courtenay. I don't know if that would remain the same in this era, and I appreciate the difficulty with gauging public opinion. But apart from my concern for staff workload in this obviously stressful time, I'd certainly like to see us move in this direction at the very least, so some of my neighbors would become legal. Thank you.
Excellent. And Councillor Theos. Or Mr. Allen, did you have a comment first?
Yeah, I think again, this would be subject of revisiting perhaps what happened 10 years ago, updating ourselves on what's going on. Really can't speak to the capacity issue until we have a further discussion. But then again, perhaps there'd be an opportunity to pilot something like this, or to restrict it to a geographical area that, of some sort. But that's subject of further discussion with staff, I think.
Okay. And back to you, Councillor Theos.
Thank you very much. Back in 2010, when as Councillor Hillian mentioned, I was also there during that time, and the survey was strongly opposed to the chickens component. I believe the gardening component is a very good idea. I know that many people that I've been speaking to have also been upping their gardening, and I think that's fantastic, and very excited about seeing more people taking food security when it means their own gardening. As in terms of the chickens, I actually back in 2010 thought that was a solid idea, and I was actually somewhat in favor of it moving forward. But the reality is, since then, I've been able to see my father in Nanaimo was able to have his backyard chickens. And I was really excited to see that he was able to move that forward, as I thought it was a real good idea. And I'm someone that really cares about the best quality product I can put into my body. But the reality became, shortly after he moved forward on it, the amount of work involved was way more than he expected and anticipated. There was also a very large increase of rats, and there was also other animals that would come, predators coming, looking to try to attack the chickens. It was apparent not long after that it became very difficult to manage. A lot of raccoons there on a daily basis, and again, the rat situation on the west side of Courtenay, we always have tremendous amount of concern about rat infestation throughout the west side, and I think this would just exacerbate it. The reality is that when my dad could no longer look after the chickens were in a position where they possibly could have been abandoned. It didn't happen, but I do know from hearing from others that in other communities, they have a real significant problem with abandoned chickens. And so for that reason and those reasons, I think we're really going to be going into a position that I think is going to put our staff in a possible position of having to answer many more bylaw enforcement issues, whether it's noise or whether it's smell or whether it's infestation of these predators. And I think that's not going to be a good position to be adding to that workload. I think it's the wrong direction to go. And after witnessing myself how challenging it is to actually have these backyard chickens from people that don't have experience doing this, I think it's it's something that we have to really be cautious when we're walking down this road, and I'm not prepared right now to move forward on that.
And Councillor McCollum.
There we go. A little slow on the unmute. Yeah, well, thanks to Councillor Morin for bringing this motion forward. Certainly the issue of food security has been percolating, sometimes in the foreground, sometimes in the background over the last 5 to 10 years. It's a common topic of conversation in local politics, and certainly the situation that COVID has put our food systems in has really brought the topic of food security back to the foreground. And I think discussing what's on this motion now is really important, and whether or not the community supports it, I think it's a very opportune time for us to have this conversation as a community, regardless of which way the public goes on it. I think there's value in discussing it again, even though the previous time it didn't have that support, and perhaps it will be the same this time, but certainly the public's sense of the importance of food security has really shifted in the last 10 years. And for that reason, I'm very supportive of us considering this.
Thanks. And Councillor Morin.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to address a couple of the comments. I know the Food Policy Council is very supportive, obviously, of all kinds of different initiatives in terms of food security, and they certainly have said that they would be happy to work with staff on some of these concerns. You know, I can't speak, Councillor Theos, to your specific situation, but I know that chickens actually clean up waste really well. They're actually great little composters, and they clean up kitchen waste, organic waste. In terms of rats, we have rats regardless of chickens, and I think that you know, that issue, even though it's cited, the actual reality of it, when I was doing some of my research, I didn't see that came to bear. I did reach out to Cumberland. They've had virtually zero bylaw complaints about chickens there. And I believe Victoria was also very similar. We've got large cities that allow chickens that certainly have the potential for rats. One of the things that I was thinking of in fleshing out a bylaw like this that might be a little bit more elaborate than others is to actually include some kind of educational component that Lush Food Action Society would be happy to partner with. That would be just a very short kind of, educational piece or something like that. And then in terms of the other issue around abandoned chickens, that's another place where we could, many people are happy to get abandoned chickens actually, add to their chickens. So there could be a sort of a refugee chicken partnership with local farmers or the Farmers Institute or something like that, to identify people who would be willing to take those few abandoned chickens if that was the case. I'm hopeful that if we had some good education, there's many people who actually have spoken to me who keep chickens who would be happy to help other people to learn how to keep chickens responsibly, and they would do it on a volunteer basis. I think that some of the fears are unwarranted, and I just think that the time is now, and many people have been asking for this. We're a little bit behind actually quite a few other communities, many of the ones that I've cited in terms of a bylaw like this. Thanks.
All right, thanks. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to thank Councillor Morin for this very timely and very thoughtful and well-written resolution. I know there are a number of there are obviously some concerns out there, and I think Councillor Morin spoke to a number of them. There are many communities, large and small, which have successfully implemented backyard chickens, and I have great confidence our staff when putting together, when coming back to us with recommendations, will look for the best practices that are out there. So I think we're off to a good start, and I look forward to like a fuller discussion when this comes back to us in the future. I'll be voting in support.
Right, thanks very much. And I do know when I first got on council, one of the first questions I had, I think with Councillor Hillian, was around chickens, who explained the report that had come back about 4 years prior to that. And unfortunately, it was after I'd already promised my kids that we would be getting chickens. But luckily, kids forget things. So I don't know what we did, but somehow the discussion of chickens had waned away. But I do know over the last year and a half or so, since being mayor, we have received many requests, and I think even some from kids who've written in and drawn things. So I think it's certainly something worth contemplating. Again, this is asking for a draft bylaw. We're asking to get some information based on best practices so that we know what the implications are. So based on that, I'm happy to support this as well. And Councillor Morin, did you have something new to add?
I just wanted to say that in terms of the idea of having a split geographically, I've had a lot of people in East Courtenay actually say they want chickens as well. So I think it would maybe do a disservice to people across the area if we were to limit it to only a particular neighborhood or area, even as a pilot. I appreciate the idea coming forward, but I think it would leave out a lot of people who are wanting this. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any further hands up. I see Councillor Cole Hamilton ready for the poll. So with that, Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
Let's get cracking.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
And Councillor Theos.
I'll be in favor of seeing the report and then taking it from there. Thank you.
All right, I'll be in favor as well. So hopefully with that, we'll get something back again. And yeah, that sounds very exciting. All right, next we have, thanks Councillor Moran for bringing that forward. Next we have Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll read the motion and then speak to it if I get a seconder. Thank you. Whereas on June 12th, 2017, Courtenay City Council unanimously approved support in principle for a land partnership with Comox First Nation and Project Watershed to facilitate the restoration of the Kuskusem lands based on Indigenous reconciliation and the significant aesthetic, recreational, environmental, and economic benefit to the city in the form of flood mitigation, green space, and restored fish habitat. And whereas Courtenay City Council also agreed to support the fundraising drive towards purchase of the lands by approving grant funding to cover municipal taxation during the period of the Project Watershed lease starting in fiscal year 2018. And whereas Project Watershed's fundraising campaign is nearing completion with the expectation that the Kuskusem lands will soon be co-owned by Comox First Nation and the City of Courtenay, facilitating exemption from municipal taxation effective in 2021. Therefore, be it resolved that Council approve payment of a grant to Project Watershed from current gaming funds in the amount of $58,580.17, said amount to be applied to the 2020 property taxes on the Kuskusem lands located at 1901 Comox Road.
Second.
All right.
And if I could speak to that, Mr. Mayor, although the resolution is fairly self-evident, I know people will have some concern about an allocation of this amount, given the somewhat perilous times we're in. That's why it's very clear that this would be from gaming funds. And I would appreciate if our financial officer could weigh in on the status of those funds. We realize that we're likely to be seeing a reduction in the year to come, but I believe we still have a significant reserve in the gaming account that would cover this allowance. This is going to be a legacy for this community for many, many years to come, a resource that that will be there for people to enjoy for generations to come. And because it's this close, I would prefer that we were able to support it in this way, rather than having the fundraising delayed as a result of the organization being required to put that money towards property taxes. It's unfortunate that we've had a couple of years where we've been asked to do this, but it's been a long fundraising campaign that has had tremendous support from the community. It's very close to fruition, and we should know within the next few months just the exact status of that. So this would enable the next step to be realized with the support of council. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And next, hang on one second. Next, we have Councillor Frisch. And Mr. Allen, do you want to speak first?
Yeah, well, yeah, just in response to Councillor Hillian's request to hear from Jennifer Nelson. We have had some discussion at the senior leadership team meeting. And so I think Jennifer is prepared to speak to that question, I guess, and I'll turn it over to her.
All right, thanks very much. I can't hear, I'm going to unmute you, if it'll let me.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear you, absolutely.
Sorry about that. So through the CAO to Mayor and Council, so just an update on the gaming funds. So the casino has been closed through the COVID pandemic, so we're not seeing any revenues come in. We did receive the first quarter revenue, so about $220,000 for the first quarter of 2020. But I would be very reluctant to anticipate any further revenues coming in this year until we know more about any opening plans. So with that said, Council is always spending the previous year's revenue. So we started the year out with a $1.8 million balance in the gaming fund. And with all of the 2020 planned spending that we have planned within our, committed to within the 2020 year in the gaming fund, that would drop us down to approximately 830,000 in the gaming fund at the end of 2020. With approving that spending, that the 58,000 to the couscous sum. So we would be falling below what we normally like to be in that fund. But that being said, we certainly will need to have another look at the gaming fund through the budget process to readjust those future years. Thank you.
Thanks for that update. I think it was Councillor Frisch, I had given you the go-ahead prior to.
Yeah, I just had a question about the current status of the fundraising, and I know you talked to it a bit, Councillor Hillian, but is there any indication of what the numbers are at this point and how far we have to go, and what other sources of funding that this organization is looking at to get us to the end?
Would you like me to answer, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Thank you. So as you're aware, there's been $1 million raised within the, well, more than $1 million raised within the community. There's been $1 million contribution from the provincial government. And there are several overtures that have been made to the federal government. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has left those in somewhat limbo. But at this point, the options that the organization is looking at include the offering to Interfor based on the money that has in fact been raised, or seeking a short extension of the fundraising period beyond the current June deadline. There's still a huge amount of optimism that the deal will be secured within the next year.
Thank you so much.
All right. And we have Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Generally, I find it hard not to want to support this. The idea of our community groups having to fundraise this amount of money to make up for property taxes is a hard one to square after just how much the community has already stepped up to raise where they've got to. But I also have this hesitation of what other asks are we going to see come January, when a lot of our arts facilities haven't had any revenues coming in, and those are ongoing things that we support too. So, I mean, it does certainly, it is a need for pause. What I'm not clear about is, when did the land change title that Couscousum is now responsible for the property taxes? That part I'm not clear about. Because we haven't, or they haven't purchased it yet, or perhaps Councillor Hillian could answer that.
Yeah, and I see Mr. Allen has his hand up as well. I'm not sure which one. Mr. Allen, did you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, no, I'll certainly defer to Councillor Hillian. He's been the council liaison from the very beginning, so I'll defer to him.
Thanks, Mayor. As part of the purchase agreement, Interfor leased the land to the Project Watershed Society in 2018. And one of the conditions of the lease was that the society would in fact be responsible as the leaseholder for the property taxes. And that's basically where things stand. Thus, the council resolution back in 2018, which attempted to address that.
So how were the property taxes covered last year?
By a grant from the city of Courtenay to the Project Watershed Society.
So in other words, this is basically how we resolved this last time, but it's not an ongoing item in our budget, in our gaming budget, and it's now come up again. And then I guess my other follow-up question, is more for staff. When this completes and Courtenay, the city is then on title with our First Nation, this amount would then reduce our budgeted revenues rather than having to come out of our gaming. Is that how it's going to look going forward?
Mr. Allen? Oh, I think you might be muted still.
Sorry. Thanks, Mayor. So yes, that's my understanding. Again, I'll defer to Jennifer Nelson. But before I do that, just for your information, we've been working on extending the memorandum of understanding that was that's now stale dated. And so we still have to work through that. I'm not anticipating any problems there, but the real I guess issue will be the final agreement, whether that's a management agreement or what that looks like yet. It remains uncertain, but we have been working on that agreement, and that's where the actual responsibilities and the commitments from the different parties will be laid out. So there'll be other implications, both positive and I guess negative in the terms of the resources required. All sorts of positive ecological benefits, I would imagine, hence the need to kind of move forward with the project. But Jennifer, if you can speak to the deferral or the fact that this would not generate the same level or any level perhaps of tax revenue. Thanks.
Sure. So when the city is on title, then it would receive a statutory exemption. And so then the assessment wouldn't attract tax levy. So essentially, when we were doing the tax levy that year, the foregone revenue would have to be picked up by the rest of the taxpayers. So, and as well as, I'm not sure, and maybe if Ian is still on the call, when that occurs, the classification on the property may also change from a commercial to a different use. So it would be valued differently as well. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Did you clarify anything, Mr. Buck, or do you think we're good?
Yeah, I think you're good. It would change, and I mean, it's up to council of the day, but it would change from its industrial zoning likely to a park type zoning.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Theos.
Thank you. I know that this project has been ongoing for a number of years, and I remembered when Project Watershed came in front of us, they were saying that that there wouldn't be a need for the Courtenay Council to step up financially. Those are the words I recall. I know they've been working hard. This is a time right now where our community is, the citizens, the residents, the homeowners are in duress and in stress, and the business community is in that same stress and duress. And we don't have the casino even open without even a knowledge of a date where it could be opened. We've committed to 2 officers that are going to be paid through those casino funds, and there are no funds right now coming in, and no guaranteed funds. No guaranteed funds. I just don't understand this move at this time, trying with the fact that that there's just no clarity of where we're going to see potential casino funds coming in if the casino is not even announced that it's going to reopen in the near future or the long-term future. So I think this is not the right time whatsoever to be continuing to dip into a revenue that is not even there.
All right. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that it's a bit of a foregone conclusion. There are only a few ways that this can go. If in fact this had been purchased, it would be tax exempt anyway, so we wouldn't be seeing the money, and the money would come from somewhere. if we don't provide the money and for some, some reason something folds, I suppose it might go back to Interfor and they might pay their taxes, but more likely it's going to stay with this organization, and they're going to have to come up with the money, and then the question will just keep coming up. So I think at this point it would be hard not to support this project, which is already raised, as Councillor Hillian pointed out, $2 million, and is very likely to succeed. Thanks.
Right, thanks. And Mr. Allen, sorry, I missed you. Did you want to add something?
Thanks, Mayor. Just for context, I guess my recollection, and we, I could double check that we could double check this, was that council had passed a resolution to pay for 2 years of taxes. And so the 2 years came and went and the taxes were paid. And then as Councillor Hillian pointed out, the pandemic hit us. And so this year was not included in the original council resolution supporting payment out of gaming funds. So just to put that into context, I think.
Okay, thanks. All right, and I think that is probably most of the conversation. I don't see any further hands up. So I'll poll council for their vote, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm opposed.
And I vote in favor, and I am glad to see this going forward. I know it is a challenge. It is challenging times, but this is a project that's been ongoing for quite some time, and it will have, I think, a very positive impact in our community going forward. So thanks, Councillor Hillian, for bringing this forward. I know this is something that is widely supported throughout our community, and so hopefully we'll be able to see it through its fruition. Councillor Frisch.
I'm just going to move on if that's okay, Mayor. Thank you. I'll move that a special in-camera meeting close to the public be held tonight after this meeting at pursuant to the following subsections of the community charter, those being 91C for labor relations, 91E for the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land, and 91K negotiations and related discussions to a proposed service.
All right, that's been first and seconded. I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Support.
And I'm in support as well. Thanks you very much. That brings us, let me get to the right page here.
Adjournment. Move adjournment.
Yeah, that's it.
No, 11.1.
11.1. Yeah, I had this in front of me. This is the poverty reduction UBCM assessment and strategy. That's all good.
Sorry.
Mayor, do you need us to move receipt or just the suggested motion?
I'll leave it up to council. I mean, if you want to have a general discussion, and then we can see if we want to move ahead with the suggested motion. I'll leave it in your hands.
The motion.
I'll just proceed. I'll proceed with the motion. Where did it go? I'll move that the May 19th, 2020 council resolution be amended as follows. Oh. Am I still on?
I can still hear you. Yeah.
Okay, it's glitchy on my end. That the correspondence dated March 6, 2020 from the Comox Valley Regional District to create a regional poverty reduction action plan in support of the province's Together BC poverty reduction strategy be received for information, and that the City of Courtenay support the CVRD's application to the Union of BC Municipalities Poverty Reduction Action and Planning Program for grant funding on behalf of Comox Valley local governments to develop a regional poverty action plan focused on affordable housing, transportation, children and youth, and food security, and that the city of Courtenay provides its support for the Comox Valley Regional District to apply for, receive, and manage the grant funding on the city of Courtenay's behalf.
Seconded.
And are there any questions? Does staff want to speak to this at all? I think it was a bit more of a housekeeping thing, but are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor?
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Thanks very much for bringing that forward. And now I think we are on to correspondence from Millard Piercy.
Move receipt.
Second.
Excellent. And did we want, does staff want to speak to this at all? Mr. Allen?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So obviously there's a request here for support. I think originally when we looked at this, we thought, oh, this could be a bit of a challenge simply because this group did not meet the deadline for the grant and aid program, as they indicated in their, I think, earlier letter. And then council subsequently, with the COVID-19 pandemic, decided not to proceed with the grant and aid program for this year. So it would be a bit of a, I guess, a challenge to approve this through gaming funds if you're not continuing on with the grant and aid program. And in fact, they didn't meet the deadline in the first place. But I appreciate a recent conversation I had with Trevor Kushner, who indicated that there's a stormwater, integrated stormwater management plan, and there's funding in that. And I could be mistaken in the way I phrased that, but anyway, I'll turn this over to, if I could, Trevor, who can speak to the benefit of possibly funding this out of operating funds, because it provides value to the city. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Allen. Yeah, you're right. It's something that I think we can fund through the operating program, and I'll detail why. It's actually not the integrated rainwater management plan, but rather our asset management division. We have a line item, council may recall, in the 2020 approved budget for $250,000 for the final program for our CCTV cammering of our storm sewer mains. We recently issued a PO for $200,000, so we have an operational surplus of about $40,000 to $50,000. This group actually does a lot of great work. All of it is pro bono volunteer work, and they actually provide our asset management group with quite a bit of data that we find very useful, not only to really understand the catchment areas, but the streams and tributaries, and of course, that informs our modeling and our downstream infrastructure. So I think an eloquent solution to this request may be just to add this $5,000 to that budget, and anticipating that council may want to go this route, I had Ms. Sarista create a potential motion if council would like to hear it.
All right, thanks. And I don't see any hands going up. So did you want to? Oh, Councillor Frisch. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest that you take care of the receipt, and then maybe we should hear that motion.
Sure. It is just receipt, so unless I see anybody waving frantically that they're not in favor of it, we'll consider receipt received. And then Mr. Kushner, if you wanted to give us a heads up on your motion. And you said Ms. Richta has a copy of it as well? Perfect. Mr. Allen?
Yeah, I just wonder if I maybe putting Wendy on the spot or whatever, but is there a way to throw the motion up on the screen?
Well, there is.
you know, I don't want to overanalyze this or technologically, put a monkey wrench in the works, but maybe you could just read it off if you have it available then, Wendy.
And the other option is there's a chat window that can be thrown into chat, but yeah, okay, I'll hand it over to you, Ms. Richta.
Okay, that the correspondence received March 2nd and May 22nd from the Millard-Piercy Watershed Steward requesting support for proposed Piercy Creek assessment project be received for information, and that council supports the Millard-Piercy Watershed Steward Group's request for $5,000 towards the Piercy Creek assessment project and utilize the 2020 Public Works Asset Management Storm Sewer Assessment operating budget as a funding source.
All right.
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, we can move forward. And that's been firsted and seconded. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to thank staff for acknowledging the very positive impact that this group of streamkeepers have in our community. And I think it's significant that this project has the support of the private sector through McElhaney, as well as the volunteer contributions. We're incredibly fortunate in our community to have streamkeepers. They've provided us, in this case, with a lot of information about the condition of that stream and the benefits of further assessment. And I'm very pleased to see this come forward and to support the motion.
Excellent. And I don't see any other hands, so I'll just poll council again, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
And Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Again, thanks to staff for bringing this forward and finding a way to make it happen. And one of the last items on the agenda, Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. This is a bit on the fly, but I'd like to move that that we support the regional district's application for the active transportation plan and send them a letter to that effect.
Second.
All right. And did you want to speak to it in any depth, Councillor Frisch, or should we just open?
No, I mean, I think it's fairly clear from their letter that they want to go ahead and apply for this grant so they can do some planning. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I can certainly try and answer them.
Fair enough. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd just like to clarify, and I don't know whether staff knows whether there's a particular form this motion needs to be in, because I think the last motion related to the poverty reduction grant that was being applied for, we had to revisit it today to put it into a certain language that was required by UBCM. Do we know if this needs to be in any particular format? Because if we don't know that, perhaps it would be sufficient to give staff instructions to develop a letter that captures that.
Right, Mr. Allen, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, my sense is that again, there's some urgency to this. I don't know if Wendy has received any feedback on it or not, but obviously the letter is pretty specific. Be appreciative if your council could consider supporting a resolution to endorse your municipality's participation in this regional project at your next meeting. So what I would suggest is we'll just confirm with CVRD staff the format that would take place. I think it's a general enough statement that we could just simply wordsmith it if we need to, and still get a fast turnaround time.
Okay. All right, and Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, I suppose my question is probably best answered by Councillor Frisch. I see some real value in identifying where our gaps are. I mean, that's a really important starting point for getting this form of transportation addressed. But I mean, a lot of the gaps are between municipalities, and the regional district, as far as I understand, doesn't really have a service that would be able to build or address it in terms of infrastructure. Is the main purpose of the analysis to facilitate getting that work done by MODI, or is there another avenue or mechanism for making that happen?
Yeah, actually the intent is really for the gap analysis is just to identify where the gaps are, and it may not just be infrastructure gaps, but there may be other gaps like educational or advocacy, and so it would be creating more of leading up to more of a plan than actually, and then the implementation would be done in whatever municipality those fall. So it might include MODI, it might include any of the municipalities. So you're right, the regional district doesn't have a function to do any of the actual infrastructure, but this is really just the planning part of it and the identifying. And I guess there'll be engagement with all the municipalities and the local areas to find out what those gaps are.
Makes sense. Thanks.
All right, I don't see any further questions or comments. So I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor?
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theo.
In favor.
Excellent, and I'm in favor as well. Excellent. Thanks for bringing that forward. And I know it when I looked at the letter, and it was from the beginning of March, and then the application in February. But I assume everybody is on the same deadlines and so one final thing on our agenda.
Of adjournment. I think I got it right.
Actually, may I, there was just a follow-up from last
Maybe
meeting
not.
that I wanted to bring forward, please. In regards to the library board.
So update?
Yes. I was suggesting that I would be able to bring back a bit of an update from the library board meeting that just occurred Saturday.
I'm okay with that. Does any councillors have any issues with that? I'm getting nods and high fives and thumbs and stuff.
Okay, really briefly, very briefly, we discussed about what the plans are moving forward, and I know that there was some discussion about if we'd have a bit of a laid out strategy, and what the discussion boiled down to was yes, there is, and today there was going to start with a series of media releases. If you go to the Viral website, so it's virl.ca, and that's where you'll see the media updates and any kind of news releases that are going to be occurring starting today, moving forward throughout the week. They're going to be released one after the other type of idea. So that is an update on what the plan is. So for the people that are watching streaming, or for the other councillors to know that you could pass on the information that to go to the Viral website, and the information will be there. Secondly, just in brief, in regards to our renovation on the library, there is an extensive renovation that is moving forward. I did update to council and staff that we weren't successful in receiving the Canada grant, but we did have the money in place for the upgrades and the renovation. So the grant was only going to mean that we didn't actually have to dip into to our funds through the Viral itself, but the scope is not going to change as a result of the fact that we didn't receive the grant, and we're at the stage right now where we're looking at a few months away from activity starting. The timeline is going to initiate with architects' consumption drawings and discussions, and there has been some fruitful discussions with staff over the last many months. And the Viral staff was very grateful to the Courtenay City staff for those conversations and moving forward in a progressive way. So that will still be moving forward within the next few months.
Thanks for the update. And it sounds like they're starting to open up operations. I know hopefully they're going to send us reminders of what's outstanding. I know my kids had quite a lot of books out when they closed down. So, but it's great to see that, you know, they're starting to get back to some of their regular operations.
And just to let you know, Bob, Mayor, that there won't be any late penalties for children's books. So you're okay.
I think we got I think we had a dozen or two. Luckily, we just given back all the video games because they actually loan out video games now, and so the kids are stuck with the books, but that's all right. I think they enjoy themselves. Thanks for the update.
Oh, you're welcome.
Anything else for the good of the city? Seeing none, I heard somebody move adjournment? I believe it was Councillor Cole Hamilton, maybe.
Yeah, I did it a bit early last time, but I think it's at the right point now. So please.
Councillor McCollum has seconded that. Anybody opposed? Doesn't look like it. It's about 6:20. So why don't we're just going to wait for the video to start.